deeply and profoundly meaningful, where she talked about how, to be honest, it wasn't really the meetings and it really wasn't the theology as much as it was just the people in that local church. She's still a member of that local church, has served as the treasurer, and she said, that church has just changed our lives, and we love the local church, and that church has been through all kinds of drama. Church splits and been through a lot of different pastors and problems, and it's like Lisa doesn't see any of that. In her mind, this is the most perfect church in the world. And she's just, people loved us into that church, and we love the church. Story number 2. Bob and Karen were derelicts of sorts, lived down in Southern California, didn't really have jobs. Well, Karen worked part-time in the back of a sweatshop, sewing together leather motorcycle jackets. As they tell their story, Bob walked into the back of this sweatshop. As soon as he saw Karen, not being one to beat around the bush, he said, and I quote, "I find myself irresistibly attracted to you. What do you say we move in and live together?" That's kind of forward, don't you reckon? Oh, Karen thought it was funny, said, "Sure, let's try it." And so they start living together. Things were going fine, actually, until one morning as they're lying in bed, early in the morning, Karen says out of the blue, "Bob, I think we ought to start going to church." Church? We're not church people. Well, I know, but I really want to start going to church. Well, they argued back and forth, until finally they struck up a compromise. "Fine," Bob hisses. "I'll go to church with you if you just let me get a little more sleep." Well, Karen got up and started looking through the yellow pages, ran across a church with an interesting name, Seventh-day Adventist. She wondered, Seventh day, do you suppose that maybe that means that they actually worship on the seventh day, on Saturday? That would get us to church a day earlier than Sunday. She called. Sure enough, there's a church that meets on Saturday instead of Sunday. She informed Bob, "Hey, we're going to church Saturday, not Sunday." Bob was okay with that because he didn't even realize most churches meet on Sunday, and he didn't care. Next Saturday morning, they come rumbling in on their Harleys, walk into the sanctuary lobby there of the church, where they are greeted by a woman who has been the greeter in that church for over 40 years. They're smelling of things they shouldn't have been smoking and drinking and so on. They walk in with their leather jackets into the lobby, and this longtime greeter takes one look at them, sizes them up and down, and says, "Well, good morning. Are you visitors here?" "How did you ever tell?" I said, "Yes." "Oh, we have the perfect class for you. Come, follow me." She escorted them into the back of the sanctuary where the visitors class was just beginning. The elder who was teaching the class that day said, "Now, is there anybody who has a question before we dive into the lesson?" And Bob's hand shot up. "Yeah, sir. I want to know, why is it that God kills little babies?" "Oh, okay." The elder did the best he could with an impromptu Bible study on if God is so good, why is there evil in the world? And when he finished, he glanced Bob's direction. "Does that help at all?" And Bob said, "Yes, very helpful, thank you." And they went on with the lesson. Bob and Karen returned the next week and the next week, until finally Karen said, "I think next week we ought to stay for church." Up to this point, they had only attended that Sabbath school class. And Bob said, "Well, I really like those people. Sure, I'd be happy to stay for church." Well, wouldn't you know it, that next Sabbath happened to be the 1 week out of the year where the preacher was going to hit stewardship. And when he preached stewardship, I mean to tell you, he preached stewardship. He worked himself up into a real sweaty lather, screaming at the saints, if you want to know God's blessing in your life, you got to tithe. The reason most of you don't know anything about God's blessing is because you're not paying a faithful tithe. That week, as they were lying in bed, Karen says out of the blue, you know, Bob, I think we ought to start paying tithe. Bob said, on what? You need an income to pay tithe. She said, well, I know, but I make a little bit over at the sweatshop sewing together leather jackets. We could start there. They argued for a bit, and finally Bob said, oh, loud, so everyone in the church could hear him, okay, God, do your stuff. Poof. Pass it on. But that next week, no blessing. See, Bob said, I told you it doesn't work. Well, you got to be patient. So the next week, same drill. Offering plate comes. Okay, God, do your stuff. Pooh. But no blessing. Week after week, no blessing. Finally, Bob said, enough. It doesn't work. Karen said, well, maybe the reason it's not working is because once in a while you make a little bit with a side business here and there. Maybe it's because we're not paying an honest tithe on both of our incomes whenever you make something. Okay. He said, tell you what, this next week we will pay tithe on any income I might make. And if it doesn't work, if we don't see God's blessing after that, then we don't tithe anymore. Deal? Deal. The next week, they put in a little extra, and wouldn't you know it, that following week, Bob's little business doubled. So they tithed again, and it doubled again. So they tithed one more time, and it doubled again. Week after week. Understand now, the little business is exploding, growing exponentially, week after week after week, for 13 weeks in a row, until Bob became one of the most lucrative marijuana dealers in all of Southern California. Praise the Lord, amen? One week, as Bob and Karen were leaving the church, they said to the pastor, we'd really love to talk with you sometime. And they made an appointment, came in, and the pastor said, what's on your mind? They said, well, you know, we were trying this tithing thing, and man, God's just been really blessing our business. It's doubled week after week once we started paying an honest tithe. And pastor said, well, that's great. What kind of business are you in? Well, it's, you know, like an agricultural sort of thing. And finally he said, actually, I sell pot, and we know. Doesn't honor God. And look, we just need some help. Wondering if you could marry us, and then if you could baptize us, and then if you could help us to relocate, because we need to get out of this area and just start life all over again. The pastor said, of course, I would be so honored to help you in that process. And so they were baptized, they were married, and the whole church showed up to put together their few possessions and pack it into a little U-Haul and send them off. They moved up north to Oregon, and the last I heard of Bob and Karen, they were serving as youth directors of the local Seventh-day Adventist church outside of Portland. I love that story, don't you? Just a reminder that every Jerry, every Lisa, every Bob, every Karen matters to God. And every story like that sets off a celebration in heaven. One more story. You heard the student colporteurs up here earlier this evening, brought back a lot of memories because I did 6 summers of colportering. At the end of each summer, we would get together in the union from all these different states, and we just have a week of recreation and relaxation. This one particular summer, we were at Nasoka Pines Camp in Carolina. After we had finished playing basketball for a while that night, around midnight, we decided to take a swim. So we all went down to the lake, and we were splashing around, having a good time, when someone asked, "Have you seen Dave?" Well, yeah, he was here. Where's Dave? Dave. Started calling for him, scouring the camp. Has anybody seen Dave? He was down here. Well, after some time, eventually somebody suggested, I know, let's lock arms. Let's make a human chain, and let's dredge the bottom of the lake. And so we did. We all got into a human chain, and we started to walk out into the water. When it got pretty deep, we'd come up for air together, and then we'd go down and dredge a little further, and then come back up, until finally somebody right near the end of the chain shouted, "I felt something, I felt something," and sure enough, dragged his body onto the shore, started giving him CPR and mouth-to-mouth resuscitation, called 911, took about 20 minutes for the ambulance to finally get there. They whisked him away, and we were left to plead with God. Save him. Please, God, save him. Then the phone call came to the camp that Dave was pronounced dead on arrival. That's over 30 years ago, and I can still remember so well staring at the ceiling, the top bunk of that cabin, wondering, what if we had started that human chain earlier? Could it be that Dave would still be alive today? 2 summers ago, I shared that story to make an appeal to God's people to lock arms and to be focused on what really matters. People who really are drowning in this world of sin. After, I noticed a couple who were waiting at the end of the line, and after I had talked to everybody else, they came up. I said, "You have a lot of patience. I've noticed you standing there for quite a while." And they introduced themselves as Dave's parents. I had no idea. I'd never met them before. They said, "We are so thrilled that you still remember our boy, that you're telling his story, and that you're challenging God's people to stay focused." And they explained a little more that something had happened in his heart, so that relieved a lot of guilt I felt through the years, because they said it wouldn't have mattered even if you had found him much earlier because of what had happened. So that was good to hear. But then they said, "You tell Dave's story as often as you get a chance, and keep his story alive." Friends, what we're talking about tonight, this one really matters. Over the years, I've seen all kinds of things that occupy all kinds of energy and time that really in the big picture don't matter that much. We argue about whether or not there's too much beat in a song, or whether we like this music, or if it's appropriate for that. And I think those conversations are important, but they don't matter all that much. I remember having many business meetings where hundreds of people came out, and we argued for hours about whether to paint the walls dark or light. And again, I think decorum in a church is very important. It's not that these things don't matter. It's just that as a church, we need to stay focused on what really, really matters. And I'm telling you, friends, this one matters. It matters to lost people who really are going to Christless graves. Talk to the parents of a child who has wandered far from God. And ask the parents, does it matter that there's some church somewhere that is just intensely focused on being intentional about reaching out and being a bridge between your child and God? Do you care at all that there's a church that really, really has a heartbeat for lost people like your kid? A lot of those parents will say, yeah, that one matters. And it matters to God, who gave the very best he had in his one and only Son, who came and died on a bloody cross to redeem the rebellious human race, sinners like you and me. Friends, this one matters. Lost people matter to God. Father in heaven, we are thankful for your heart for lost people, that you know every child of yours, and your heart aches to be in friendship, in relationship with every one of your children. God, I pray that you would give us a vision as your church, your people, to stay focused, to be intentional, to build friendships and bridges. In the name of Christ, I pray.